And now, a little bit about our presenter. Mary Ellen Carsley is a scientific and botanical illustrator, as well as an art educator. A former practicing architect, she has illustrated 8 books and numerous articles for national and international journals. Her works have been included in the collections of the National Building Museum and the Library of Congress. She's a member of the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, Maryland Federation of Art, the Art League at the Torpedo Factory, Washington Calligraphers Guild, and the Guild of Bookworkers. We're really excited to have her with us today. She just had to draw winter trees. So over to you, Mary Ellen.
Well, it's a pleasure to have everyone join me here in my home studio this morning. And as Libby said, today's workshop is going to be focused on winter trees. One of the things that I love about this subject is that, first of all, trees are everywhere. They're all around us, so you never lack for a subject to draw. The second part is that I love about drawing trees is that it's because it is a wonderful way to really sharpen one of the most important artistic skills, and that's learning how to see. We look at things all the time, but we seldom really see. One of the things that I love to mention to students is try to remember the first person you saw this morning and exactly what they were wearing. So many times we look at people and we don't actually see them, and we look at the objects in our world, but we don't really see them. So this is a great artistic skill to help us become better at drawing or painting or whatever medium that you choose to work in. Now, in order to help make the most of our short time together, one of the things that I've done is I've posted all of the important information from this workshop on my website. This is the screen that you should see. It says that it's under construction because I will be posting the drawings from today's workshop still on here. And you should look for the emblematic tree for this workshop. That is a tree that I actually drew on Mount Mitchell in North Carolina. And so what we have here is I want you, as we begin to, and we look at this first example of drawings for a tree drawing, is I want you to think about those relationships of parts and think specifically about the artistic elements of line, value, space, and texture, because you want to remember that trees are actually a full volume and they are a cylinder for the most part. The other thing about trees to remember is don't sweat the small stuff, okay? You don't have to draw every single little leaf, and you want to learn to draw from big things down to the smallest elements, okay? So you're always starting with big gestures and down to the small. We also want to remember to use a full range of values. So you'll notice that we have very dark values to very brightest value of the paper. And then also to think about different lines from very thin lines that almost fade away completely to very thick lines. Okay, and then you also want to imagine creating a sense of balance between the solids and the voids, because our trees and roots give us that opportunity to actually kind of sculpt the space and celebrate those beautiful spaces that occur between branches, between trees. And then most of all, I want you to relax and enjoy your practice. Be forgiving, okay? Don't be your own worst critic, okay? Practice does make perfect, okay? And the great thing about trees is all you have to do is look out your window. I can think of no better way to survive a boring meeting on Zoom than to look out your window and sketch as you go along. I actually find that I listen better when I'm sketching. So maybe that will work for you too. Here's our suggested materials list, but if you don't have everything today, please don't worry about that. A pencil and any paper is going to work fine. I'm going to encourage you not to take notes and to just draw along with me. But there are pictures. You can click on these and they will enlarge so that you can see exactly what the materials look like. And lastly, I have students ask me all the time, what do I recommend to have on your studio bookshelf? What books can help you? And being a bit of a 19th century sort of person by nature, I'm very fond of books rather than videos, and I certainly spend enough time these days in front of computer screens. I think, like all of us, that books can be a wonderful, wonderful relief. So I highly recommend The Artistic Anatomy of Trees as a great place to get started, as well as any book by Arthur Guptill. And I've given you the covers here to help you along. Here's your notes. You can click on those notes. It's a hand-drawn worksheet from me. It's going to cover everything that I'm going to say today. Also available is a master drawing reference gallery. I really enjoy looking at the works of master artists, and I encourage you to do so as well. Look at these drawings, and after we walk through a drawing together today, go back and take in these images, really study them, and bring those things that you love about these images into your own practice. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to get started doing some drawing together. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that. And you've got me back and just for a moment, and I'm going to walk you through about some things to look for as we begin to draw our trees. So you can see a sketch that I've done here. This sketch is actually posted on the website, so don't worry, it's there for you. So I want to make sure that we got some good light on there. And one of the things that's really wonderful is this grouping of trees was actually a group of trees that's on a kind of a lonely side of one of the school buildings on the campus where I work. And I was looking at these and I just thought, what a beautiful stand of trees. And you'll notice that the trees actually all have a slight angle to their trunks. And this is a result of the prevailing wind. This is actually quite common with trees. And I wanted to start with this stand of trees to show you how each tree can have a kind of personality and a posture to it. And this is something that's very important to look for in these trees. This particular group of trees reminded me, they actually are mulberry trees, and they reminded me of a group of ballet dancers. They have this wonderful slim anatomy to them and this lovely bending and turning to their limbs that is just so lovely. So when you look at this, we'll walk through those parts of the trees very quickly. We have the trunk of the tree here, and this area from the trunk up to the first large boughs is referred to as the bole. The largest branches are boughs, and then they break off into progressively smaller branches. It's very, very important to notice that if I added together the sort of volume of this bough and this one, I would come up with the same volume of the trunk. So that it's only in extraordinary circumstances where you have trees that have a deep wound or something like that, where you'll get a mass that's above the bole of the tree that will be larger. Typically, you want to think about it breaking down in a very, very equally proportional way. And then notice how the branches get slimmer and daintier as they go off to the very, very edges, to the smallest of twigs. So we want to keep this in mind. This in general is the case for deciduous trees. And remember, deciduous trees are trees that lose their leaves in the wintertime. So we get to see their beautiful bone structure with this. Now, the other thing to look for with it in our anatomy of trees is to notice that Up here, of course, is where all of our foliage would go, and up to the very, very crown of the tree, which is the top of the tree. Now, something to remember that there's a whole world going on underneath the tree, and you'll notice that right here at the base of the trunk that we have that this area down here, this begins to show you how that we have the canopy above, but how we have that spread of roots is going down below. It's good to keep that in mind because oftentimes when we're drawing a tree, you'll see that different species will have extensive roots that will go out at the base, giving you an indication of that wonder that's going on underground. Something to look forward to on your tree as well is to look for the texture of the bark, looking for those telltale signs that sort of tell the story of the life of the tree. When you have cankers and pruning marks, as in this case here, or you have basal cavities at the base of the tree, these wonderful, unique characteristics, they really bring life to your tree to capture that. You'll also notice the different play of light that's on the trunk as well. And you want to try to always keep in mind that you're going to have a lighted side of the tree and you're going to have a darker side of the tree that is turning around. When we think about that, always think about the basic sphere. So if we have a sphere here, it's going to cast a shadow, and that cast shadow is going to be darkest, closest to the sphere, and then it will fade as it goes. And we'll notice that the cast shadow is always very elongated as well. So it's an elongated form of what you're seeing, and it has very soft edges. Then if our light source is coming from the upper left-hand corner, as you see here, then you have the darker side of the sphere. Notice that as I'm putting in that value, okay, that I'm actually making boring lines very consistent, close together, but I'm also having them slightly curved to reflect that shape of the sphere that I have. A little bit of blending, and I have the turning shadow, which is the point where the object turns away from the light. Okay, but notice here on the back, it's somewhat counterintuitive. On the back, we have a little bit of an area in the shadow where it gets lighter. This is called our reflected light, and this is the light that's bouncing off of the ground plane back onto the object. And this is that subtle change in values is what makes it possible to, when we capture that in our drawing, to create that illusion of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional surface. So one of the other things that's a very nice thing to do is on that lighted side, provide a little bit of background, just so that we create a point of contrast between the highlight and between the background or that space. Now our object, our simple sphere here, looks like it's sitting in a space rather than floating and having no kind of, it's not grounded. We don't have a sense that it exists on a ground plane and in a space. You'll notice that all of these basic things that I've done here with the sphere, you're going to find in this drawing here. I've even given a little bit of background here on the lighted side. Notice that our turning shadow is just past that midpoint of the trunk. That trunk is a rounded cylinder, and then I have that reflected light on the back side. So let's take this apart. You've seen a drawing that's at about I would say this is about 50% of the way, maybe a little bit more. But now let's start on a drawing together, and you can either draw along with me because this reference picture is on the website. This is one of, I actually told our head of school that if he chopped down these trees, I might quit, because I'm very, very fond of these trees. We're so fortunate on the campus that I teach on. We have a whole stand of catalpa trees. And for those of you who aren't familiar with those are the trees that they bloom with almost orchid-like flowers in June, and then they get these very long, like vanilla beans for seed pods by midsummer and early fall. So these catalpas that we have, they're so wonderful. And what I love about them too is they have a moth that's exclusive to them that lives its entire life cycle, the catalpa moth, on this tree. It's a caterpillar, it's an egg, it's a larva, a caterpillar, and then becomes a moth and mates, and then the cycle continues on these noble, noble trees. So this tree here, I truly loved, and this is one of the many angles that you'll notice on my website. I showed you I took pictures of this tree entirely in the round, and that's to inform not only my eye, but also as a reference if I don't understand something that's happening with this tree. I can go back to my reference photos and I can take a look at those. Now, you will notice that I took these pictures recently. We still have snow on the ground, and obviously working from photographs is much, much more desirable in my warm studio than sitting outside. So that's another reason to take a lot of good reference photos too, so you don't have to sit outside if it's not a comfortable place. And I will mention to you that when I drew that Mount Mitchell tree, the thing that I remember the most about drawing that tree was how cold I was when I was drawing that tree. For those of you who have been on Mount Mitchell, you probably are aware the weather changes about 6 times a day, and I was there when it went from fall to winter. I was drawing that tree, it seemed like. So it was well worth it, but it was a tough draw. So now those are our basics in getting started. And before I start walking through the drawing and how I would approach drawing this tree, I want to just check back with Libby to make sure that there's no questions if there's any questions I can answer right now.
I think just the difference between the numbered pencils that you had, and also I noticed that when you were doing the sphere, you switched pencils during your drawing. So if you could just talk a little bit about that.
I'd be happy to. Those are great questions. So going back here, you're going to notice that I do indeed have a number of pencils. And actually, I'll go through also too the other tools that I have here. So the first pencil that I actually did the underdrawing with this, and you want to do an underdrawing particularly if you're planning on going into ink. But for doing the underdrawing, I was using a 2H pencil. Now, the H and the B pencils, the difference between the two of them, and when I put the values on, I'm using a series of B pencils. The difference between the two of them is that, of course, we refer to the pencil as a lead, but that's a bit of a misnomer. It's called lead because it behaves like lead, but it's in fact graphite that's been combined with different amounts of clay. The more clay binder it has, the harder the pencil, which means literally that when I go to make my darkest dark, and you'll see I have a small value scale here, which I always recommend to do before when you get a new pencil, get out your pencil and just do a little value scale. And one of the things that you'll notice is that the H pencil, the darkest value, is really not nearly as dark as the B pencil. So this is just generally, H pencils are just generally lighter pencils. Now, the higher the number, So a 2H, a 4H, a 6H, 8H, and on up. The higher the number means the more binder it has, and therefore the lightest, the pencil only makes very, very light marks. Okay. Now the B pencil, and again, the higher the number, so a 2B has more clay in it, a 4B has less clay in it, which means that you can get a much, much darker value. As you can see, compared between the two, this is the B, and then this is the H value scales that you have here. Now, when you do that, the advantage of the H is that it doesn't want to move around. It has binder in it, and when I take my tortillion or my stump out and I go to blend it, it doesn't blend. The H pencil does not blend as readily as the B pencils do. So if I know that I want to do a lot of blending, I know that I want to have some very, very dark values, then I'm going to use my B pencils. And then if I'm doing some underdrawing and I want to keep those values very light because maybe I'm going to do ink or watercolor on top of it, and I don't want that graphite to move around very easily, then I'm going to use my H pencil. So I hope that answers the question with that.
That's great, Mary Ellen. Thank you. We did have one more question, and then I'm going to let you jump back into drawing, but it relates to the photo that you have there, so maybe that'll help transition you back to the drawing itself. And that is, do we see the reflected shadow that you've mentioned in the photo?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Photos, and this is why drawing from life is so essential. You will notice that no, we do not see that reflective shadow in there nearly as much. Now, I will point out, and in one area here, you do start to see a little bit of the reflected light here on the bottom of this large bough. But on the side here, you do not see it. And this is the disadvantage of using photos and why you should only draw from photos after you have looked at the subject yourself. Because first of all, when you take a picture, you are using your compositional skills. You are framing the subject the way you think it looks the most attractive. And so you're using your artistic eye. When you use the photos of someone else, you're using their artistic eye to compose that, to compose that image. So it's really not completely your work at that point. The other thing is the disadvantage of photos, unless you have a most excellent camera, you do not pick up the subtlety of the reflected lights. Cameras tend to flatten out images, and they also tend to make the values, they simplify the values. That can be a good thing if you're just trying to get like the basics of it, but it can be a bad thing if you're looking for those subtleties. So that's why you really want to go outside and you really want to look at the object yourself and see that. So that's an excellent question. Thank you so much for asking that. I wouldn't have said it had you not asked the question, so thank you. The other thing about the photo, and this will be a great transition if we're ready for that. Is that good, Libby? Are we good to go?
Yeah, let's jump in, please.
Okay, great. So one of the things you're going to notice is there's a lot of stuff in this picture, and this is where you need your artistic eye and you need to trust yourself. So now there's a lot of fussiness of little tiny branches that go off in different directions and maybe are not the most artistic part of it. It's you will always notice when you go to gardens like our botanic gardens, when you go to the National Arboretum or places like Longwood Gardens or Brookside Gardens, you will notice that the trees are well maintained and that they're very, very trimmed. There's someone who really helps the trees look their best. But in a more natural setting, trees get these little branches that go off to the sides and to the less artistic ways. And this is when, as an artist, we get to show the tree as its best self, our subject as its best self. it's one of the things that I always loved about the painter John Singer Sargent. He was a very, very famous American portrait painter during the late 19th century, early 20th century. And Sargent was famous for showing people looking at their natural best on their best day. It didn't make them not look like themselves. They don't look made up, but he had a way of bringing out their natural beauty and their natural subtlety in their character. And that's what you want to train your eye to be able to do. And you only do that through lots and lots of practice. So what I have here, and again, because our time is short today, I've started this tree. You're going to notice there's some big omissions, right? I didn't bother with this fussy little crepe myrtle. Okay, I'm not really interested in the crepe myrtle. I didn't bother with these fussy little branches that take away from this beautiful arcing trunk. I really wanted to capture that. And then you'll also notice that I've edited out a few things. There's this, catalpas have this way of getting these interesting like bowls that occur at boughs when they have broken a bough or been, and then the branches sort of spider out of it. And this is a less graceful part of the tree. So I've simplified that in my drawing here. And that's truly what artistic license is about, right? You're making your subject, you're sharing. And remember, when you're drawing, this is what I love about drawing is you are sharing the beauty that you see in the world. You're sharing your vision of the beauty that you see in the world. And that's why art's so essential. And I think even so much more so today, because, we all need that. We need to be reminded of the good things, the beautiful things. So you're going to notice that I started this drawing. You're going to notice that I started it by creating a series of axial lines here. It really just started as, 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines. So I understood that direction and movement of the tree. Then I put in those axial lines for the major boughs as well. You're going to notice that my tree looks quite angular right now. And I'm going to suggest to you that when you start to draw trees, that's what you do, that you keep it pretty angular. Those soft, subtle curves, they're going to come with time. And as you're working on the tree, they'll work their way in. Working this way will help you make sure that you maintain your alignments and your proportions as you're building up the structure of the tree. So we start with the big area here, and you're going to notice that I even put a little elliptical shape down here to remind me this is a cylinder that's moving up through the tree. And I start those major boughs by putting in that elliptical cylinder to remind me that it's going that where that branch begins. And remember, they don't just pop out of the sides, they build up gracefully because the tree gives it this beautiful support at the bottom here to support all of that weight. Overall, too, notice that I've balanced the drawing. This tree is leaning sharply to the left, so it needs to have a counterbalance to the right. Not only artistically, but structurally, it requires that. It also needs some thickening down here at the trunk, which is there actually on one of the other angles of the tree, but I've added it here, a little bit of thickness here, so that my drawing looks more balanced. The next set of lines that you're going to notice is I've begun to block in all of my values. And that's where I'm going to start today, by starting to put in those values. We want to have a nice range going from that, you'll remember from my previous drawing, from that darkest dark to that lightest light. Okay, so when I start to put those values in, and this underdrawing I've done with the 2H pencil, and now I'm going to work with my 2B pencil. Okay, and I'm going to start from right here. I'm going to start from the main part of the trunk, and I'm going to begin to put in those values just as you saw me do when I was working on the sphere. And I'll put those values in. Notice that I'm going to build these up really carefully and slowly. And I'm working in big gestures. It's either dark or it's light right now. I'm not worried about, there are some beautiful, subtle values that come in. You'll notice right here, I'm going to start to bring some of those in. These are the branches of other trees and also it's shadowing itself a little bit. I'm going to start to put that on, put those in, and now that I have that basic value there, I'm going to start to put in where it's going to be a little darker. And notice I'm just doing a simple overlap. I am not bearing down hard at all, because when you bear down, you run the risk of two things that can be problematic on your drawing. If you bear down too hard, the binder will heat up in the pencil and it will actually make it sticky. And you don't want that graphite, especially when you're working with the values. You want to be able to manipulate it on your canvas or on your paper. So you want to make sure that you put those values on very lightly and build them up by layering them. Now I'm using the photograph to help me, and you'll notice that I am shifting the direction of my lines because every artist does it slightly differently. I think that the human eye picks up that direction of the line, and it can help make your tree look rounder, just because I'm perceiving that gentle curve in the lines of the values. And you'll notice though that I'm keeping them pretty boring though. I keep them consistently in length and in the width apart. This is when it's a good time to put on some music that you really enjoy, and you can just relax and start to put in those values. And notice now, even just with this little bit of value that we've put on, notice how the tree already is getting some dimensionality to it, and how it's kind of exciting because it's starting to sort of be, as my younger students would say, it's looking really real. I love my younger students when they talk like that. So now at the same time as I'm working, one of the things that I'm noticing is that this particular area of the tree here is becoming of visual interest to me. So I think this is where I'm going to put in a little bit more time and a little more detail. I find this quite beautiful here. All of this gentle curve and this beautiful void that the branches have sculpted. It's just lovely. So I'm going to spend a little more time creating emphasis there. I'm probably going to do a little less here. And I really love the base of trees. So I'm going to probably put a little more time and effort and detail into this area. That will work nicely, and I'll tell you why. One of the things that's tempting with a tree, because there's so much detail, and we look at it, and especially if they're in full foliage, you might think to yourself, I'll draw winter trees, but I will never draw trees in full foliage in the summer because I don't want to draw all those leaves. That would just drive me mad. And if you did draw them all individually, it might challenge your mental health just a little bit. So it's probably not a good idea to even attempt that. But what you need to do is, again, see the big gestures, see the big movements, And you'll only bring detail out in certain areas. And when you do that with a kind of a rhythm where there's a lot of detail here, less here, more detail here, and maybe a little less here, and more detail up here, our eye loves that rhythm of dark to light, and then detail, less detail, detail, less detail. And this has a way, this is a little artistic trick that helps people's eye move through the drawing. Because as I said, you want to carry them through that whole vision. Now, you're probably watching me put a little bit of value on that outer side, and that's fine, because remember, it turns. So there's going to be a little bit of a turn here. And now notice that since I've been doing this very lightly, my values are going to, all of this graphite's going to respond very nicely. And I'm going through a very, very gentle circular motion and just blending those values out. Now, if you lose your reflected light, don't worry, don't panic, because drawing is additive and subtractive. That's what your eraser is for. Okay, and because, oh, excuse me, you can draw just as much with your eraser as you can with your pencil once you have the graphite down. Now, you're going to notice that your tree is going to start to look, at this point, it might look a little rubbery. Okay, it looks a little bit like it's made out of something solid, like maybe some plastic or something like that. And that's because we don't really have the texture in yet. And that's okay, because that's going to come next. That's going to be our next part. So I'm looking carefully at my photograph, and one of the things that I know about the catalpa is that it has these absolutely splendid, long, deep ridges in its bark. And there is a kind of language to that line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to mimic that language with my, sorry, I think I got in front of my camera there for a second. My apologies. So I'm going to try to mimic that language with those lines to start to put in that texture. And I'm going to keep it. I am not changing pencils anymore. I'm going to stick with my B, but I'm going to keep that texture a little bit lighter in here. And then I'll do a little more in these areas where it's very dark. There's a wonderful split here where there's this pruning scar. It's so great. Trees, after I've drawn trees for a long time now, I notice that so many times they're like people, their bodies tell a story in their life. I've always been a big fan of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and in Sherlock Holmes, and I love when he tells people that, oh, you're a typesetter, or you've been a policeman, or he always knows because he studies their posture and the way that they dress and tells the story of who they are. You'll notice that as I'm putting this in, I'm using something called lost and found line. And what that is sometimes I'm, I bear down just a little bit and then lighten up so that the line is irregular, and then I can begin. Just, if I lose some of it, that's okay. You want your drawing to have some parts that, as I mentioned, that are more detailed and some that are less detailed. And the reason is it's a little bit like, and speaking of literature, this is the beauty of poetry, right? The poet, you got to get on their wavelength, understand like how they see the world and what they do. They don't tell it to you all out. It's not a news story where they're going to give you every single detail. You fill in the blanks, and that's part of the artistic experience. You fill in the blanks with your own understanding and your own perceptions, and drawings like that. You fill in those blanks, and then, that's why sometimes looking at paintings, looking at artwork, looking at drawings, I'm so fond of looking at the sketchbooks of the artists that I admire and look to as mentors, because there's something very personal about it. You get to understand something really intimate about their vision. Now you're going to notice our texture starting to come alive here, starting to get a sense of what that tree really looks like. And I'm going to start to put in, I just love all of these, how it builds up these strong boughs like this, and then has these sort of rings of strength. Those of you who have an engineering background, who may be attending today, you think about, trees are wonderful structures. Human beings, I always make this joke with my husband, like, people got things done before because they didn't have cable. Well, that's how human beings figured stuff out, right? We looked at the world around us. We didn't look it up. So there we go. And okay. So, Livy, I'm going to pause for a moment and see if you have any questions for me.
Not currently. There was a request if it's possible to sort of adjust your image slightly so that it's a little bit straighter for people to see on camera.
Okay.
But if that's possible, if not, that's
I think I can
work with it.
I think I might be able to get a little closer too.
Some people are also struggling seeing the photo and your image. So now the photo is completely out of frame.
What I would recommend for the photo, because to tell you the truth, here's my photo right now. I'm kind of done with my photo.
Okay. Your image is now slightly to the left side of the screen, so I don't know if you could center it at all. We are seeing kind of like the lovely little ceramic duck and stuff. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Thank you.
You see, my duck actually is a water container, which is something I'm crazy about. That it was a part of a calligraphy set from Japan, and my duck is kind of he keeps me company on there. So now what I'm starting to do is, as you can see, where I have a good memory of this tree. As I told you, I'm incredibly fond of these trees, these catalpas. One of the things that's really lovely is they bloom every year. They're in full bloom during our graduation on campus. And so our students walk over this snow of blossoms, of catalpa blossoms, when they graduate, and it's really breathtaking. They are just, and these trees are so noble and so old. I fear they're getting a little bit on in life now, and it is wonderful to see the caterpillars start to come out. And then in the fall or late summer, when we start school, we can start to see the moths. Now you'll notice I'm creating all of my emphasis up here.
Mary Ellen,
yes.
to interrupt, we did have a question if you were going to have time to show sort of the ink that you were planning on using.
Oh, definitely doing that. Oh, well, and we are getting on that time. Goodness me. We must, well, I hope
time flies.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hope everyone's having as much fun as I am. Okay, so what we're going to do here, I'm going to leave this. We could see how I was getting started there and how we have I've started with the texture of the bark and doing that. And as I would move down here, I would leave less in here, and then, as I mentioned, I would start with lots more texture down here so that I would have this kind of rhythm of detail and darks and lights throughout my drawing. Let me set this one aside and we'll come back here because we're going to revisit my stand of trees here and talk a little bit about how to work with ink in our last few minutes. I do have a whole section on ink in our on my website there for you to refer to. And so you'll see I have this stand of trees. I loved it. I thought this would be lovely to work with ink. And so what I did was I just redrew them, and and again, this is a 2H pencil, okay? And then what I did was I have my India ink here, and I have this. Let me open it up carefully. I want you to remember that there are few things in life that are permanent. Obviously, death, taxes, and you need to remember India ink. India ink it just doesn't come out of anything. So you'll see that I've already started putting some values down here. And what I did was I began with a very, very light value, and I used my broad brush to come in and to put a very, very light background value here. And I would do that I load the brush with a lot of water and then just touch the edge with the India ink and then more water. And I'm checking the value as it drips down the side of my water vessel here. And then of course I can go in and add more water and then blend it as I go through. I'm working on 90-pound watercolor paper. I was actually drawing on 90-pound watercolor paper as well. I'm really fond of watercolor paper as sketching paper. And you'll see I'm just using the edge of that brush to come in and to work around those little branches and twigs and even the larger boughs there. You go through there. I might have to darken this down. It's got a little darker because I want to keep that background a little more uniform. And then I can always fade it so that it looks intentional. And you'll notice that
Mary Ellen,
yes.
Is that hot or cold pressed paper?
Good question. I use hot press paper. Cold press, you might be fighting the tooth. That's the texture of the paper a little bit. So, but that being said, were I going to draw a pine tree with a really textured bark and all of those needles and scales and things to render, I would probably use a cold press paper with a mild tooth to it, because the tooth would work for my subject then. And so that would be really desirable. So then what I'm going to do is, you can see I'm actually, now there is another way that you can work. You can have a palette, and you can see that I do a lot of calligraphy and Asian style painting from my equipment. I do a lot of printmaking too. You can pre-mix your values. I actually don't always do that. I enjoy working with the ink, and as I said, making those value adjustments as I go along. Now, the one thing to be careful about is, remember, when you're putting a very different value, such as I'm doing now, next to another value, you want to make sure that the value next to you is dry, because you don't want it to bleed in a direction that you'd be unhappy with.
Mary Ellen,
Although,
can you
yes,
say a little bit about the brushes that you're using as you paint?
the brushes that I'm using are, I'll be honest with you, I am not. These are from Utrecht. They are the Sablette brushes. This is a 2. So this is a 2, and it's a bright. When you refer to it as a bright or a round, they have the more pointed tip. This is a flat. So I use the flat. And as I said, these are all from Utrecht. They're called the Sablette, which means that they are they're a synthetic sable. Sable brushes are just that. They are from the animal, and they have the animal hide, the animal fur. But I don't use, I have some of those for other paintings and things. I don't use those with India ink because of its staining quality, and particularly with organic material, it tends to stain a lot. And so I don't use it for that. I also don't use it because I'm pretty happy with the performance of these. And rather than spend, $30 on a brush, I can spend, $4 to $8 on a brush. So, and I really recommend that when you're beginning, you when you don't buy the cheapest. And I wouldn't want to put down any particular brands, but don't buy any familiar name brand that makes crayons. But also, don't buy the most expensive. Middle of the road, is going to be just fine for your purposes. If you find yourself fighting with your media or your brush, then yeah, it's not working for you. Then try some different ones. But I'm not, I've done watercolor for a long time, and I've just begun to buy like pretty expensive watercolors. And I will say, my husband, who is a portrait painter and a sculptor, he has had a set of Sennelier pastels, which is a very, very expensive brand that was a gift to him a number of years ago. And I think last week he just opened the box, and he's had it for like 20 years. He just felt like he was, I don't want to say worthy, but he just felt like, okay, I think I probably should use them before they go bad.
Hey, Mary Ellen, should people try using the ink on their drawings that they were creating with you earlier? And could you use watercolor instead of India ink?
Yes, if you want to use watercolor, by all means, use the watercolor. It's much less intimidating than the India ink. India ink will not lift. Watercolor will, and which means that with the watercolor, you will be able to actually remove some of the color and get some reflected lights without having to manipulate the value. So you see that I was very careful when I was doing this tree to I was very careful to make sure that I worked from light to dark. And these two trees, since they're the closest, I'm going to have my darkest values on those. I'm going to come in and, and if you can work quickly, put a little bit of a dark value down and then come back. And here you can see an example of where I'm trying to set up that dark to light movement. Get a nice focal point down here, and then boom, have it be lighter in between, and then a much darker area up here, and then we'll let it go, and then I'll come back up here and do that. And that rhythm of light and dark is just so much fun.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody for joining us today. Thank you very much.